Received this nice Sessions mantel clock for servicing. The clock belonged to the owner's grandparents. Has been in the family since new. Case is in nice original condition. Lion's heads are made from cast iron and still finished with the original gold paint. The ring on this one has left some marks in the black paint here. Green paint on this wood trim is finished in a simulated marble, popular in the early 1900s. Pedestal base is cast iron, finished in gold paint. This column shaft is wood that is finished in simulated marble. The capital trim on the top. The simulated green marble paint here has shrink cracks in it. The overall finish on the clock is a black enamel paint over wood. It's in an aged but original condition. These dot designs were made from a die that was pressed into the painted surface. Most I have seen had gold paint in the depressions. A wear spot here from 100 years plus of opening the bezel to wind it once a week. Dial is made from an inexpensive paper and shows its age. Here the paper is scuffed off from the key being fitted into the regulator arbor. This F is for fast and S is for slow, arrow showing the rotation of the key. Dark stain is an oil stain from someone over-oiling the movement in the past. Brass center trim has the gold plating still intact. The small green area here indicates some exposed brass. Bezel mounting frame also retains its gold plating. Another dot design on the bottom here. Front cast iron feet are attached with 2 nails. This one has loosened up over its 100 years of life. Rear feet are fastened with nails as well. The fasteners holding the bottom soundboard are loose. Brownish stains on the bottom here could be mildew or even fingerprint remains. The gong fastener where it's mounted to the soundboard. Black enameled finish on the top is aged. Multiple chips, scuffs, dents, and scratches. Gives it an aged patina look. Hands look to be original. Bluing is missing from them. Glue joints have dried and are loose on the case. This is typical for a 100-plus-year-old case. Loose nails on this lower back panel. The removable back panel appears to be a replacement. This swing bracket has been loosened to accommodate the mismatched panel. It's bowed out at the top and the bottom. The warp has loosened this bottom panel. 2 rabbet cuts, one old one and one new. Something has been modified here. I'll come back to this later. Take a quick look inside the case. Wood structure here is all in good shape. Missing 1 mounting screw here. Remove the movement. Sessions Clock Company, Forestville, Connecticut. Numbers on the upper right front plate. Not sure what these signify. Dirt and lint particles. Remains of a bug here next to a dried pivot. The greenish-looking grease is dried clock oil. Running these clocks with crusted pivots like this can score the pivots. Dried green oil on these gear teeth. Not a good practice. Lint and dried oil residue on the count wheel. Looks like a spider skeleton here. Dried oil at each pivot location. Tough to determine how much wear is present when it's hiding behind all this dried oil. Spider skeleton hung in its own web. Definitely overdue for servicing. Another bug skeleton hanging out on the pallet fork arbor. Rust on these pillar posts. Uneven release on this mainspring. Coils should have a more uniform spacing between them. Uneven spacing like this usually indicates a lubrication issue. Fingerprint damage. These dark marks is where the gold plating has been damaged. The darkness is from the copper and zinc oxidizing. And here, a deliberately scratched X, probably someone marking a worn pivot hole. Scratches damaging the gold plating from a tool. Most likely someone who didn't have access to proper tools. Could be someone used pliers to remove the nuts instead of a socket. More damaged gold plating. A deliberately scratched X and 3 center punch marks in the plate. Someone attempted to close a pivot hole instead of installing a bushing. Sign of a butcher. This regulating assembly only has 1 screw, which dates it to the early 1900s. Later movements had 2 mounting screws on each side. More damaged gold plating around this fastener from some type of tool. Looks like someone oiled these lantern pinions and gear teeth. Insect skeleton legs here. Close up, you can see how the excess oil has collected dirt and lint. This green dried oil here is where the bell was unscrewed. I soaked the movement in solvent to remove most of the dried oils. This will make it easier to determine the amount of wear in the pivot hole locations before it's disassembled. This third wheel pivot looks like there is a metal ridge on the pivot. The bearing surface may be scored. I'll find out when the plates are separated. Lots of wear. I've marked the loose holes with some tape. Tape is a reversible way to mark the loose holes. Scratching X's through the gold plating into the brass plates is non-reversible, scars the movement for the rest of its life. Time to pull the movement apart and do some further inspection. Here's that 1 fastener regulator. I believe Sessions went to a 2 fastener regulator sometime around 1925 or so. Regulator transmission gear. Verge, rear plate, escape wheel, 4th wheel, 3rd wheel, 2nd wheel, great wheel. These trundles are the rotating type. They were made and advertised as acting as roller bearings. It was an experiment that gave way to solid trundles. Very little wear on the gear teeth contact points. Some heavy scoring on this pivot, most likely from running the clock with dried oils. The other pivot is scored deeper than the first. Lack of oil. More scoring on this pivot. Thick oil on the lantern pinion trundles. Not sure if this is a crack or a scratch. Poor quality on these trundles. They should be smooth with a polished surface. Some of them are scored on the surface. It's a process defect that went unattended to. Sessions received the stock for these trundles as a roll of wire. The wire was fed through a wire straightener die. Looks like one of the die ends had some damage to it, left small scratches as the wire passed through it. Some wear on these from the gear teeth. Bearing surface on this pivot is scored. The arbor shoulder has tool marks on it. Looks like someone pried on it while it was in the movement. Possibly a screwdriver was used. Another sign of a butcher. I can smooth them out when I recondition the pivot. This is how they should look. Nice and smooth like glass. This will reduce friction and make it run nice and smooth. Once they're all polished, it'll be time to install the bushings. The worn side is where the tape is pointing to. The hole can either be filed to center or can be pulled to center using the reamer. Either way works good. This hole needs to be pulled away from these center punch marks. To pull the hole to center using a reamer, just cut the unworn side of the hole until it's centered. Then cut the full 360 degrees for the rest of the cut. Now to cut a custom bushing. Looking good except for the scratched X and center punch marks. Now to ream it to fit the pivot. Ream from both sides until the pivot fits just right. Nice and flush here. Once it's back together, it'll be tough to know it was bushed at this location. Fits great. Now the bushing for the main wheel. Identical to the original worn-out bushing. These bushings are flared on one side to hold them in place. The new bushing needs to be cut slightly long to allow for the end to be flared over the plate. Fits like it was made for it. This end will need to be flared over to lock it in place. Should look like this one when done. I'll use this hardened ball bearing and vise to flare it over. Some putty to hold the ball bearing in place. Press it together using a vise. Looks excellent. All cleaned and ready to assemble. This new bushing blends in nice now that the plate is cleaned. The bushings I made only required the minimal amount of material to be removed. In doing so, only the wear was removed, and a smaller area on the movement is altered. The original oil sinks were saved. In theory, over 100 years of wear was removed to true the worn pivot holes. So these new bushings should have over 100 years of life in them. It would be quicker to use oversized bushings, but then a lot of originality of the movement would be lost. So until my clients direct me otherwise, I'll continue along this path I have chosen. Here you can see the replacement bushing and the original oil sink has been saved. Installed bushing next to those center punch marks. Fingerprint damage is still visible. Missing gold plating here. Small scratches in the gold plating. I've seen people use kitchen abrasives and cleaners on these. Not a good practice. They end up leaving scratches like these and abrading the gold plating off. Fingerprint damage. This is one of the wheels that had the heavy scoring. Ended up using a graver to cut it clean, then polished to a nice finish. Time to assemble. Oil the movement. Now to deal with this warped back. Fit up on the top is so loose it lets in dust and bugs. The warp has caused the lower back piece to pull away from the case. Fasteners are finger tight. Not good. The warp is excessive. This piece pulls off easily. Fasteners are not able to do their job. Must be 100 years of dust in here. The backs of these were made from local, inexpensive soft woods. I'll look for some red cedar that matches fairly well. I'm not going for an exact match, just something close. I'll be reusing the same nail holes, So we'll snug them up with some wood wedges and glue. I don't intend rebuilding the whole case. This lower piece of wood needs some bracing before it can be nailed. This clamp will give a good heavy backing, but the clamp foot is too close to the nail for the hammer to get to it. These vice grips have narrow jaws, just what is needed to grip the nail for installation. Time to install the movement in the case. For these hard-to-get places in some of these cases, it helps to have a screwdriver that holds on to the screws. This is a vintage, made in USA screwdriver. This one is from about 1940. It's called a Holdies, made by the Upson brothers. No longer manufactured, but many of these were built and can still be found today. They were patented in 1927, very popular and sold into the 1950s. The back wouldn't be complete without a stock label. I made this label from an old original one. Using some non-acid water-based adhesive, it's time to bond it to the back. Fits great. Original black enameled Sessions mantel clock.